All right, we're back again. Brodes and Mosh, that's Hunter Brody. I'm Geoff Mosher. And man, since the last time you and I did this, Hunter, so much has happened in Philadelphia sports to the point where we're not even going to lead off with the Philadelphia Eagles. That's how exciting it is for other teams right now. And trust me, it's not hard to be more exciting than the Eagles. But in this town, to trump what the Eagles are doing, you got to do something special. And we saw it. What is it, Wednesday night, something very special with the Philadelphia 76ers, and that was Daryl Morey getting to work, right? And look, so let's talk about this in the right type of lens here. For me, I viewed draft night, trade night, whatever you want to call it for the Sixers, because they did both, as just a fantastic appetizer. First of all, I see it as addition by subtraction. You got rid of one awful contract and another player who was a good player but just didn't fit here in Josh Richardson. So Horford and Richardson are gone. You got some nice shooters. You got Seth Curry. We'll see how much Danny Green actually plays. You know, he can be streaky, but he's a shooter, right? And then you were able to draft a kid from Kentucky who, you know, you never know, but I like kids from Kentucky. I think there's promise there. But to me, I don't want to say but. I'm excited. I feel like it's the appetizer at a really nice wedding, like that shrimp wrapped in bacon. But when you look at the team, and you know, you can get okay shrimp and wrapped in it. This is like coconut shrimp, coconut crusted shrimp wrapped in like that really thick applewood smoked bacon. I mean, it's just fantastic. You could eat it right then and there and call that dinner, but you know you're at a really nice wedding and there's going to be more. And as I look at the Sixers right now, I can't help but think, okay, this is good for what it's supposed to be, but I want more. I got to compete with Boston and Miami. It's still got to be better than what they got now.
We're on the same page, no doubt. So I look at this because right now you have some holes to fill in the starting rotation. And the best way to describe it is you're waiting for the corresponding moves. This is just step one, and then you're going to wait for what's next. I just don't know what you have left that will get you that next piece that you're super excited about because, well, you did give up Josh Richardson, and I thought your best package could maybe be a Matisse Thybulle with Josh Richardson with the first-round pick. Maybe that's your best package to go out and get a Zach LaVine or someone of that caliber. You don't have that now, but you have Daryl Morey, and he seems to be able to get the job done with or without those moves. That's what intrigues me. But if you have Ben, Tobias, and Joel, if you just slide a Seth Curry and a Matisse Thybulle or a Danny Green in the starting rotation, it's fun because it's more fittable. It makes more sense, but that's not a, hey, let's go win a championship right now type roster. So I'm waiting for the corresponding moves just like you are. And you did mention getting a guy from Kentucky. I hate to throw the Eagles right into this, but this does feel like the go get an LSU guy. Go get someone who played at Ohio State. Why are we trying to be too cute and looking at Washington, right? Something like that, even though Matisse Thybulle came from Washington. You went out and got a player from Kentucky, someone who was a highly respected player, and he can't shoot from three very well, but he seems to be an all-around great basketball player.
Well, that just means he'll fit in really well with the 76ers, that he can't shoot the three very well, but he's an all-around very good basketball. I mean, if that's not Ben, if that's not Thybulle, I mean, gosh, even Joel Embiid shoots the three-pointer probably better than the two guys I just mentioned, but from a percentage standpoint, he certainly doesn't shoot it very well. But no, I look, the difference here is that there's not like 1,000 other players, right? Like the NFL draft. And this kid, as you mentioned, has some legitimacy to him. He played at a high level. He's obviously not a finished product. He had that injury, I believe, too, that kind of held him back. It is a little questionable when you see that he's part of the clutch sport environment and he knows Ben Simmons and LeBron. It's like, oh, great, we're getting another kind of like, we're just like assembling that. Is it though, or is that just a favoritism thing?
No, it's a good thing. Look, you got LeBron. You saw workouts of him and LeBron. If you're telling me you're working out with LeBron, I'm in. LeBron's not just going to work out with Hunter Brody in the gym.
Is this like the Sean McVay thing where if you know LeBron, if you've been touched by LeBron, like a hug or a pat on the back, you are automatically part and connected and to the clutch organization, and therefore that makes you a great player? Is that what we got going on here?
It gives you a higher percentage. I'm an analytic guy, Mosh, except for when it comes from going for two.
Isn't KCP like a clutch guy? Like, he's a pretty good player, but he's not a superstar. I mean, yeah, we would take him at any means, but
he's a champion.
He is a champion. So is Danny Green. And that's
big, though. That's big. He's a 3-time champion. Something that I really think is important about Danny Green. Look, he won with the Spurs, he won with Kawhi and the Raptors, and he won with LeBron. And I'm not saying that, look, I think his best basketball is behind him, but that's okay. From a leadership quality and from that standpoint, you won with 3 different organizations in different ways. I just think that could be beneficial to the squad.
Fair enough. I would say this. Danny Green is the type of player they need because he's a shooter, but he is streaky. And if we're relying on Danny Green to either be a starter or even be the first guy off your bench, I think we're in trouble. But I don't think that that's the case here. I think this is the beginning for Daryl Morey. I think he accomplished what he needed to do first and foremost by getting rid of the Al Horford contract. That alone makes it a victory. But you know how we are. Once the season starts and once the game goes, it's going to be about winning and losing and whether or not this Sixers team, there's 2 things that are involved with me. Whether or not they're constructed properly to be able to compete with Boston and Miami. Right now, as we sit here today, not yet. I still think they need to make more moves, or Ben and Joel really have to develop underneath Doc Rivers into bona fide, almost flawless superstars. So we haven't seen that yet. But the second thing I would say is that from a fit standpoint, you wonder how they view the starting 5 at the moment. Let's say that there would not be another move made, or the move that they bring in is a guy who's good, but it's not James Harden, right? I mean, you've got Ben, you have Joel, you have see, that's where Seth Curry right now has got to be penciled in as a starter, which is kind of like Seth or Matisse. But you have Ben, Joel, Tobias. I kind of wonder where Shake Milton fits in all this, because he was a guy that really intrigued me last year, and he's been somebody that the Sixers have needed as far as someone who can score on his own, but then also score off the pass. He can play on the ball and off the ball, and he showed you something last year. I don't know, though, that you want to move forward saying Shake Milton's in my starting 5.
I would agree with you. I like Shake Milton. I'm intrigued by Shake Milton. I think he has a unique skill set that I can't wait for Doc Rivers to get into. It's definitely there. It's going to be a work in progress. But if he's in your starting rotation, he was thrown, and unfortunately for him, it's not like he was ready for the moment, but this kid was thrown into this mess at the end of last season, and that's not where he is yet in his career. If you're talking Shake Milton starting rotation type conversation, you don't have the proper team to go out there and compete for a championship type squad, and maybe that's what it is. Maybe this is a year where, and I don't know. I mean, I expect more moves from Daryl Morey, but once again, I don't know what you have that would be able to acquire something so big that you go from this team that'll be fun and exciting to compete to a legit championship, unless you just give up a bunch of first-round picks, and I don't know if that's going to be the case. Although, Daryl Morey's history, he's willing to move on from those first-round picks.
Well, is there anybody you think the Sixers have that first of all, sometimes when you're trading for a player and that player wants out, and of course everybody's thinking James Harden, but between now and the start of the season, we'll probably hear about a few more moves being made, right? You don't always get equal value in return, or sometimes you do and you don't even realize it. For example, and this goes a little bit back, but when the Pacers traded Paul George to the Thunder, right? They didn't think they were getting anything that great in Sabonis, Oladipo, and I can't remember the third player involved, but it wound up being that Oladipo emerged into quite a bit of a player, a real, top 15 type player. And Sabonis is actually a really good player as well. So that trade worked out. But you remember what the thought process was at the time. Paul George wanted out, and the Thunder almost stole him, is kind of how the narrative went. So I'm just wondering if there's anybody you would be willing to part with right now to get a level of play. Would you be willing to get rid of Matisse? Would you be willing to package Matisse, Milton, if there's something there, and maybe a first or two first to get a top 15 level player?
Yeah, it would take Matisse Thybulle for sure. That would be the starting point, although the Sixers came out and said that he's untouchable. Now, maybe that's a smokescreen. Maybe that's what good people do in a front office like Daryl Morey to make it seem like, hold on, you're going to have to, really give us something in return if we're going to give up on Matisse Thybulle. Maybe that's the head game that they play. But yeah, I would absolutely be willing to give up on Matisse Thybulle. I think he's exciting. He's young. He's got great defense, obviously. But you can definitely fulfill that role where even if it's not the same type of player to that level, you can still find a way to grab a nice role player that can give you a bunch of intensity. I would be willing to move on from Matisse. I just don't know what you're getting back. And I feel that there's two names being thrown out there outside of James Harden, and that's Bradley Beal and Zach LaVine. And I just wonder, can you find a way to snag one of those two pieces? And there's probably someone else out there that we're not thinking of off the top of our heads, but I know that those two have been heavily discussed in rumors. Do you have enough? If Matisse is the starting point in terms of actual player and the rest is added bonuses, and whether that's a player or pieces, is that enough to get the job done? I don't know. I don't personally feel that is, because if I have those players and I'm like, okay, what can you give me? I don't know if Matisse Thybulle and a first round pick is enough for Zach LaVine, but who knows?
Yeah, it always feels like to me, Hunter, that whenever you have really good players from a statistic standpoint on bad teams, that's always a red flag for me. I mean, we've seen this throughout the course of NBA history. Guys get fat off being on really bad teams. They get huge contracts, and then they move elsewhere, and they're just not the player that you thought they were getting. Now, sometimes it is a guy like Jimmy Butler, right? He's moved from one team to another and to another and has been a star wherever he played. But, you go back to like Kevin Love from Minnesota, and not that he was a bad player in Cleveland by any stretch of the means, but was he the same player in Cleveland that he was in Minnesota when he was averaging a double-double and he was the man all the time? Not necessarily, right? And you go through, you'll find hundreds of cases of guys who were really good, got traded to another team, and weren't that well. I mean, Al Horford going to the Celtics. Sometimes it's a fit thing, but I don't think Al Horford is actually not a good player. I think that was more of a fit. But sometimes you actually see that player himself not be what you thought he was. He was just a player on a bad team who was getting fat off somewhere else, So I do wonder about what I would be willing to give up to get a LaVine or a Bradley Beal. But I don't understand this idea that anybody in the NBA, especially anybody on the Sixers roster, is untouchable. How can you be saying Matisse Thybulle is untouchable? I mean, look at all the great players who have been traded. Russell Westbrook's been traded. Paul George has been traded multiple times. CP3 has been traded multiple times. You're telling me that Matisse Thybulle is untouchable? For what reason? Nobody other than LeBron and I'm trying to think who else. Like I would really put maybe Anthony Davis, right? Nobody outside the top 3 or 4 players in the NBA should ever be deemed untouchable. I don't care how much talent that they have, unless it's a guy like, say, John Morant, who will probably emerge into has the makeup to emerge into a top 5 player, and you're building around him. And of course you don't want to trade him just for another superstar, because why would I do that? Same thing with Zion. But why are we throwing Matisse Thybulle into this like pot of people who should be considered untouchable when you've got, all-stars and Hall of Famers going left and right? That to me is ridiculous.
I couldn't agree more, and that's why I feel that maybe this is Daryl Morey just showing his expertise, if you will. This is him throwing a bunch of smokescreen out there, so when teams do make those calls, they know, hold on a second, Daryl Morey said that this kid's untouchable, maybe I can sway him by adding in this or adding in that, and that's how Daryl Morey operates, and that's why he's so damn successful, because I'm with you. There's no way that Matisse Thybulle should be untouchable, especially when you know you have a roster that is very flawed, when you know that you have a bunch of pieces that don't make a lot of sense. The only way to get rid of some of those would be, well, maybe you got to add a Matisse Thybulle or whatever the case may be. He's actually an asset that I feel should be very movable because it can only help you out to get rid of some of the slop that you have. But to counter that, he seemed to do an okay job. It's weird. I saw a lot of people upset that you only got Danny Green and Terrence back for Al Horford. You could argue that that's unbelievable what he got back in return. I do think that we maybe overhyped how miserable Al Horford really is. It's a terrible contract. We all see that. But Al Horford still has value if he plays the 5, if he's the only 5. And I don't know what the deal is with OKC and Steven Adams and what they're going to do there in general, but I don't care. I don't care about that team.
And there are 3 million first-round picks.
Yeah, you're right. You're not wrong. I think it's something like 17 or something through 2025 or whatever. But yeah, like I think we were being a little aggressive on how much Al Horford stinks. You're never going to be able to move it. I thought that there was value with teams that need this veteran voice, and he can clearly still play the 5 position. But getting Danny Green and Terrence, because they're one-year deals. They're off the books after this season. It was a really solid deal for that Horford one.
Frankly, I have no beef with Al Horford. I don't blame him for the year that he had with the Sixers because he got caught up in the wash. I mean, he was a player who came in here, was asked to do something that he didn't do in Boston. I think he's still a good player and can fit. I bet you if he went back to Boston right now, he'd be fine. Maybe he wouldn't be what he was 2 or 3 years ago, but he would fit in the system that asks him to do what he's good at. Al Horford, under Brett Brown's system here at the Sixers, was a guy who was chucking up 3-point shots left and right and not the defensive, smart, great passing, intellectual type of player that we saw in Boston. He was just got completely lost in the sauce of a very chaotic year last year. And honestly, I don't think he was miserable, but I do wonder, he's considered one of the better guys in the NBA, really amenable, really likable. And when he comes here, and his attitude always seemed to me to suggest that he didn't love the locker room here. He didn't love how Ben and Joel were either treated or how they carried themselves. Well, now that he's gone, it doesn't mean that Ben and Joel are doing anything any differently either, right? So I do wonder what we should read out of the fact that Al Horford didn't seem to enjoy his time in Philly. Everybody wants to blame Al Horford for that, but before he came to Philly, he was known as a productive player and a very good guy. And now people are looking at him like a disgruntled guy who was mad on the way out, and they're sending threatening messages to his sister, which I think is ridiculous. I just think that is more reflective of perhaps what the culture was like in Philly and not what Al Horford brought to Philly, but what was already here. And most of those people are still here. So I think that's a little bit of a red flag for me.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point, and I think we'll only know after we see how Doc Rivers and this assistant coaching staff gets to operate with them, right? So we'll only know once they get their fingerprints on these players and this culture. I mean, there's definitely a different mentality when you go to Camden every day than when Brett Brown was here and that staff. So that's going to change the mentality of things. But if you want to look at what just happened in L.A. with Doc Rivers, it was very, very noticed, and it was discussed how once he left L.A., there were these conversations, and even during his time there, the conversations about how Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, they got treated differently. And I know people have problems with that, but unfortunately, that's where the NBA is now. You see James Harden, who's like, you know what? I don't want $103 million. Get me the hell out of here. I want to go to Brooklyn. And I hate that's where this is, but that is where the NBA is. They have the power. So you just saw Kawhi and Paul George get this certain treatment with Doc Rivers, who, we're excited about the accountability. We're excited about his new voice. We thought Brett Brown was too soft, and I thought at times he was. This is clearly an upgrade at the coaching staff position, no doubt. I've just seen it happen recently, though, with two stars. They had a different level of, a different level of accountability held towards them.
You're talking about Anthony Davis and LeBron?
No, Kawhi and Paul George.
Oh, Kawhi and Paul George. Okay. I thought you said the alternative to that. No, yeah, you're right. That clearly did not work out the way it was supposed to work out. And look, here's the interesting thing. James Harden wants out, as you just mentioned it. He's probably, I would think, if I were a betting man, well, I am a betting man. If I were a real hardcore betting man, though, you would have to handicap him going to the Nets. It just makes so much sense. They have bona fide star power. Apparently, he's very cool with KD and even in Kyrie. But of course, I mean, the upper echelon players are all kind of in a fraternity here, so to speak. So it just makes so much sense that if he gets his way, he would get to the Nets. And that would probably make them, well, I think it would definitely make them the favorites in the East. Whether they win it all and put it all together remains to be seen. But I know a lot of Sixers fans want James Harden here. And I look at it and I have no hesitation in thinking if James Harden came to Philly, he's going to average 30 points. He's going to get along. He's going to lob the ball to Joel a lot. It's going to be a great 1-2 combo. But I do wonder how, I mean, we literally just saw a year and just talked about the unfit with Al Horford here and how important it was to get rid of him. I don't necessarily see a great fit between Harden and Ben Simmons, because both of these guys are used to having the ball in their hands, right? And if Harden's coming in here, he's not coming in here as an Allen Iverson off-the-ball two guard. He's going to want the ball in his hands all the time. He's not a spot-up shooter. So what does that do to Ben? Ben's a guy who only functions well right now with the ball in his hands. He is not an off-the-ball player unless you're putting him in the dunker spot where he disappears, and that's really not a great role for him. And then it causes all those questions again about fit. So as much as and I'm going to say this, as much as I like James Harden as a player and I acknowledge he is a superstar, I don't love him. I will be the first person to admit I really appreciate his ability to be a prolific scorer, but he has come up short in a lot of big games. And he's also a guy you've put many people around and it hasn't produced a championship. So I wonder how much better he can make an overall team. He can always be great himself. I wonder if he can bring a team to a championship. I think that raises all sorts of fit questions again if you were here with Ben Simmons.
Well, does it change your opinion if it took Ben Simmons to get him and then you had James Harden and Joel Embiid as your 1-2 punch with the roster built around those? Because I feel the only way you're going to get him is if you give up a Ben Simmons. And I've been pretty defending Ben Simmons for my entire career here of doing this. I've defended Ben Simmons for a long time. And I said, even if I had the option to do it, I personally, if I was the one that was pushing the button, I don't think I would do it. But I would totally understand why you would do it. I just feel Daryl Morey just got here. This coaching staff was hired before he was put in the chair. So this coaching staff came here because they wanted to get their hands on Ben and Joel as a duo. And if Daryl Morey just came in and said, you know what, I don't care, I'm making this move anyway, he does have the balls to do it, no doubt. I just feel that he thinks it's too premature to make that type of move. But would it change your opinion if Ben was what you had to get rid of? So then your combination is a big man in Embiid with a hell of a guy in James Harden as your primary ball handler.
Yeah, so I'm kind of torn on that, right? I think that I think you have a better fit, to be fair. I think you have a better fit with James Harden, Joel Embiid, and Tobias as your third quote-unquote star, right? And then you do right now. However, again, you're almost talking about two completely different types of players. You have one guy who is just an insanely talented scorer, a pretty good shooter, and just almost unstoppable. He's going to go to the free throw line at will, but he's going to play absolutely zero defense. And this team's already struggled for the last 2 or 3 years trying to stop guys like Sebastian Dinwiddie, right? Or Spencer Dinwiddie, from dropping 50 on. I mean, they've gone through the gamut of having guys just completely torch them for 30, 40 points in the backcourt. So are you? I almost wonder if is it neutral? Yeah, you're getting a great offensive player, but you're giving up a great defensive player, and plus you're also giving up on the potential of what Ben Simmons could be. That doesn't concern me as much. I know some people think he's untouchable because of the potential of what he could be. I'm going to go back to this. Nobody is untouchable. No, unless you're LeBron or unless you're Anthony, you're not untouchable. And Ben has not reached the level yet where he should be considered untouchable. No one on the Sixers is good enough to be considered untouchable, to be honest with you. Given the climate that stars get moved and traded all the time. So I guess I'd say I'd be comfortable with the trade, but at the end of the day, does that make them a better equipped to win a championship? I don't know. I mean, if you brought in Harden and put Thibault in the starting lineup to give you that lockdown defender, then maybe you've helped kind of mitigate the defensive acumen lost in trading Ben. It is one of those moves that you're right that you could potentially regret down the line. I mean, you would have to make sure Harden is invested for the long term here, and there's no perfect answer on this, Hunter. I mean, I love Harden as a scorer, but I don't love him as an overall player.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of positives on both sides, for real. It would be something where, look, if you move Ben Simmons, it would have to be for something that clearly satisfies a lot of people. And I do feel that James Harden is in that category. He's an upper echelon guy, top 5 in the league. He can score, no doubt. I think it puts you in a better opportunity to win right now, but that shortens the window. So if you have a 2-3 year window to make that run with Embiid and James Harden, which you can argue might be better because you don't know how much time Joel Embiid has left. If you're going to wait 5, 6, 7 years for Ben Simmons to be in his quote-unquote prime, like I give NBA players, when you're ready to take a team to a championship, when you are that guy, and I feel Ben Simmons can be that guy, you're looking 28, 29, 30. It's a grown man's league. It's not like 22-year-olds carry teams to these NBA final runs all the time. You got to grow physically. You got to grow mentally. It's a different type of beast in this league. So by the time Ben Simmons gets to that time frame, Joel Embiid, he might be out of the league with everything that's gone on to him physically. So would James Harden make the most sense? Because you have a better chance right now, shorter window, but you get an elite talent in James Harden. It would be something that I would understand why they did it, but I'm so high on Ben's ceiling. But then you throw this out there. Do you think that Ben Simmons will ever be better than where James Harden is right now in terms of the league? If you look at the entire league, James Harden is clearly in that top 5 category. It's LeBron, Kevin Durant, Steph Curry. James Harden is up there. Will Ben Simmons ever be in that category of players? I would like to think yes, and I feel defensively he's elite 1 through 5. But that's really, really high, and James Harden is in that conversation. Will he get there? I would like to think so, but there's a very good chance he's not as well.
All right, so you make a good point there about the level that Ben Simmons will eventually reach. Why don't we just operate under the assumption right now, Hunter, that Ben and Joel are going to be here, Tobias is going to be here, and you have the new front office and the new coach, Doc Rivers, who are tasked with not only winning, but developing Ben and Joel to a point where Brett Brown just could not. At the end of the rope, at the end of the day, he just couldn't develop them the way you needed them to be to win a championship. So you've got Joel, who is a hell of a talent, but has flaws. He turns the ball over. He's not a particularly great post player, specifically when he's double teamed. He doesn't pass very well out of the post, and that leads to a lot of turnovers. And his shot selection has not been great. And then, of course, you have Ben, who we would love if he actually had a shot selection that was away from the basket. Now, Doc is being tasked with figuring this out. And as fans and as media, we want them to not only figure it out, but as we do every year, it's like they've got to compete and win a championship. That is the expectations, or at least be involved in winning a championship, competitive to that level. Last year was unacceptable, and that's why you've seen all this change. What I ask you right now is this: do you see Ben and Joel? Because I'm not there yet, even with a new coach. If they don't make another move, then it's really about Ben, Joel, and Tobias all being good enough and playing well enough together to be able to beat the Bostons, Miamis, and the Lakers, and whoever gets better here over the next month or two. I don't know that I'm there yet. I think you really need to see those two guys develop the right way.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't see it yet. I don't think that this roster, if you're expecting Ben and Joel to be that much different this season, to go out and beat the Milwaukee Bucks, who are making trades left and right, getting Drew Holiday, although the Bogdanovich news seems to be trending in the wrong direction. I guess we got to keep our eyes out for that. But Miami and Boston, I don't know. Like, can they beat Boston? I guess maybe they could beat Boston. But in terms of, as we say, the end result being that championship team, I don't think that they are there if you're just waiting for Ben and Joel for this upcoming season. Now, if you want to expand...
What would even make you say, I guess they can beat Boston? They haven't beaten Boston even when they were good. Well, I'm not talking about regular season. I'm talking about playoffs, you know?
I don't think that... Like, I think the Boston Celtics are good, don't get me wrong. But do they have that? Like, I don't look at Boston as the NBA title team either. So I'm almost saying that it's not like Boston scares me to the point where they would scare me. Milwaukee scares me. And that's the thing. The Brooklyn Nets would scare me with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. The Boston Celtics are a good team and arguably better than the 76ers, but they don't scare me to the point where they're going to run the East, and I think it's impossible to beat them in 7, if that makes sense.
Well, I just think it's weird that you're more scared of the Bucks, who the Sixers seem to play well against, right? Only, of course, in the regular season, and who have fallen short of expectations in the playoffs than you are the Celtics, who seem to last year, definitely more than seem to, they given what they were throughout the regular season and then the restart, they exceeded expectations. They were there. They were in the Eastern Conference Finals. Now, I'm surprised that they lost to Miami. I mean, Miami wound up exceeding everyone's expectations, but I still look at Boston and the style of ball that they play, that cohesive, free-flowing, defensive, aggressive style and say that's been kind of the kryptonite for the Sixers. I mean, they play a brand of togetherness basketball that the Sixers we wished we would see out of them.
That's true. And look, you didn't have Ben Simmons last year, and that would change so much defensively when it comes to how you match up against some of those wing players for Boston. So I'm not claiming that, look, it would be easy, it's a no-brainer. I'm just saying in a 7-game series with the healthy Ben Simmons, is it possible to win the series with the new coaching staff, with the new identity, Seth Curry being able to stretch the floor out, actually having spacing on the floor? Sure, I think that it's possible. I don't think it's an automatic write-off, but yeah, there's some reasons to be concerned as well. I just don't look at Boston as this insane juggernaut, just because I don't think that they have that superstar player that would completely scare. They have Jason Tatum, who can groom into that superstar. Is he there
No,
right
he's a
now?
superstar.
He's
he's a superstar.
Is he there right
now? He's a
now,
superstar.
though?
Yeah.
He's a superstar in the making.
No, well, I'm not saying he can't get better. Of course he can get better, but he's a better player right now than Ben and Joel are. But he's a less flawed player.
Ben on Tatum in the postseason, I don't think Tatum's giving you 25, 30 points. You got Ben clapping down,
I don't know about that.
Down a bit, taking some charges.
We'll see. All I know is, a couple of years ago, people were like, it was between Ben and Donovan Mitchell for Rookie of the Year, and there was all this, consternation, and Mitchell was like, oh, he's not really a rookie. And here's Jason Tatum flying under the radar, and he's a better player than both of them right now. And he's been a better player. So a more complete player, a more well-rounded player. And that would be an awesome kind of Bird Magic type of showdown. Listen, that's hyperbole on my part.
Yeah,
they both got a little bit of way to go. But Ben being hurt clearly took that away, that matchup away. But look, that's something we can't ignore as we move on from the Sixers here. Like the fact that we haven't talked about the reality of neither Ben nor Joel being able to stay healthy over the long term for any of these seasons is got to be on the mind of Daryl Morey as well as he weighs whether or not to make a deal. These guys very rarely, going back to the start of last year, right? Like this time last year before COVID hit and stopped everything, how frustrated were we with the Sixers simply because those guys don't stay healthy and play together?
Well, that was one of the biggest issues. It's like, okay, well, for this 5-game stretch, you don't have Embiid. Oh, Embiid's ready to come back. That's great. Al Horford was gone for a little bit of time. Oh, you finally got Al Horford back. Josh Richardson has an issue. You can never find a way to get the team, the starting 5 on the floor at the same time, so you never knew what they actually were going to be. Also, keep in mind, and I think this does play a role, in the Brett Brown era, and I know you have to do it now because you put yourself in such horrendous spots financially and things of that nature, but all right, you have this team. Get rid of Markelle Fultz, Robert Covington, Dario Saric. Here's Jimmy Butler. Here's Tobias Harris. Let's move those guys. Here's Al Horford. The roster, imagine being a player in Ben and Joel, and when you are available, the roster is constantly somebody new and new pieces being thrown in the mix. You never have an opportunity to really gel as a team. Now, I understand why you had to do it this year, but now this now opens up a window of having players. Let's bring up Seth Curry, for example. Josh Richardson, he had a player option after next season, so he could have got out of the contract, and with Seth Curry at $8 million a year for 3 seasons, he's going to be a guy possibly here. That's someone that you can keep in your lineup, and now it's like, okay, you have pieces that make sense, and I know Danny Green and Ferguson, they're more of, you're going to get rid of those contracts after the 1 year. But I do think it's crazy that, here's all these pieces over the last handful of seasons, legitimate pieces that just kept getting thrown at them. When will we have a mold where it's like, okay, we know who our guys are, and these are the core that we go into the season with? There'll be bench roles and depth pieces moved around, but these are our guys. You haven't had that yet.
No, and look, I think at least we can say this, and I know we've been in this position before, whether it's new player, new coach, new front office, right? But there's some excitement that goes into the Sixers season to see what's going to become of the changes. Now, again, that's how we felt every year over the last 3 years, right? Whether it was getting Jimmy, whether it was getting Tobias, whether it was getting Elton Brand instead of Brian Colangelo. But that's what the Sixers do. They keep us invested because they keep making changes, and to see if one of these days throwing something against the wall actually works and makes this team a championship contender. Speaking of contenders, we're actually going to talk about the Eagles, even though they're not contenders. They were expected to be. The big issue right now, Hunter, regarding this team is clearly what's going on offensively between Carson Wentz and Doug Pederson. And I think it's fairly obvious at this point that Doug doesn't blame himself for a lot of the problems of this team. Because if he did, he'd probably consider giving up play calling just to see if that changes everything. I mean, what else does he have to lose? What else can he have to change to get Carson Wentz to play better? But clearly he thinks that just drilling, repeating, doing it better is going to work. I'm mixed on this because when you see teams change play callers, very rarely does it actually provide that spark. In fact, there's already been 2 cases of it this year, right? The Jets, Adam Gase, after weeks of saying, I'm not going to do it, did it. And I think the last 3 games, he has not called plays. His offensive coordinator, Dell Leggins, has called the plays. In game 1, they scored 10 points. In game 2, they scored 9 points. Now, game 3 took 3 weeks. They played the Patriots, and they scored, I think, 27 points and still lost on a field goal. But at least there was some points scored. Now, they had Joe Flacco and Mims back and Mekhi Becton, so they were able to get some personnel back. But it took 3 weeks. And then you just saw Matt Nagy give up play calling to Bill Lazor in Chicago. And if it was not worse, it was basically the same. So I ask you, because I know that you are sick and tired of the product that the play calling that Doug is putting out there every Sunday. But do you realistically see a better play calling option within the confines of the NovaCare complex right now that would make you feel better?
I don't. I honestly do not. And that's something that, was discussed on the Sports Bash between Mike Gill and I. I mean, we've been going back and forth between, Wentz being the big-time issue, Doug being the big-time issue, both acknowledging that both of them have been horrendous. There's no doubt about it. But, we're getting back and forth because I'm a little bit more critical on Doug Pederson. But I brought that up. It's like, the best example is another debate that me and him went back and forth on. Are you putting in Brandon Workman or are you putting in Hector Neris for the 3rd inning and expecting some great results? So if I don't believe in Doug Pederson from a play calling standpoint right now, I think he's in this funk offensively with some of these calls. I don't know what his brain is doing. Marty Morningweg or anybody else, Rich Gangarello, do I think that they're just going to step in and change is automatically going to happen? No, I honestly don't. So I think the more of the issue is Doug Pederson having to find a way to figure this out. Look, I know Carson Wentz is missing wide open throws, but there are strong suits that he does very well, like the rolling out of the pocket, right? I keep bringing up rolling out of the pocket. I'm not saying that the guy needs to do it every single play. That's the only thing you can do. But knowing that's his strong suit, knowing that's what he does so well, the fact that it takes you over a half of football to do it twice in back-to-back plays, like, to me, that's horrendous. That is garbage coaching. He's so good at it. You're telling me halfway through the 3rd quarter is the first time you do it, you see 40-yard chunks of offense, and you don't do it again? Like, that is abysmal coaching to me, and that's just part of the problem when it comes to Doug Pederson's play calling. That doesn't excuse Carson for missing the wide-open throws.
Well, that's what I'm getting at. I mean, do you think that a different play caller or even a different head coach is going to come in here and all of a sudden get Carson back on track? I mean, it's possible. We've seen before changes of environment can help a coach. It can help a player. But Carson has been kind of this streaky guy for so long now that I'm almost of the belief that, look, I saw Doug Pederson and Carson do it last year in December. Right? They just kind of snapped out of it, and bam, things all of a sudden Carson started playing a more careful brand of football. So why would I not believe that they could do it again? Well, I'll tell you why. Because last year they played a pack of really bad teams. The only team that was any decent in December that they had to play was Dallas. They beat Dallas. If you remember, Dak Prescott came in with a really bad, banged-up shoulder. They weren't even sure if he was going to play, and he kind of looked it. Now, I'm not making excuses. They dominated them anyway, but that was really the only game that they had to win. You go look at the Eagles now. You got a 5-game stretch. All 5 teams are above 500. Some of them well above 500. The Browns are 6-3. Yes, the Browns are 6-3. The Eagles have not beaten a team yet that is even within a snip. Well, I guess no, because the Niners are what, 4-6. The Giants are the 2 or 3 win. No,
win is a good win.
No, they've actually looked better against better teams, but they've still lost those games. So this is a really ominous 5-game stretch, and I honestly think this, Hunter, if you're Jeffrey Lurie, if you're Howie Roseman, who may himself be on the ropes, you've got to almost see this through with Doug and Carson to see if you need to make changes.
Yes, I agree with you. I just look at Doug Pederson's offense as a whole, and look, because the way I look at it is it doesn't pop. It's not sexy. I say the same thing about Jim Schwartz's defense. So I'm a Jim Schwartz supporter, if you will. His defense, it's not heavy blitzing. It's not sexy. You play the sticks. But he has a 20-year career where, there's success there. Whether you like him or not, whether you agree with his scheme or not, or you get frustrated with it, it works when the front four gets home. He has a philosophy that shows it does work in this league. But it's not sexy. With Doug Pederson's offense, I asked the same question because I don't like it. All right, it doesn't pop for me. Very vanilla. But is it the same thing as Jim? I question it. Is it efficient but not sexy when you have a quarterback that can make its plays and make its common standard throws? I just think that Doug Pederson's offense is your average standard NFL offense. And I don't know. So the argument is, well, if Carson Wentz hits his throws, if he hits that 7-yard pass instead of sailing it 10 yards too high, is this different? If he hits Miles Sanders in the chest, is it different? Do you feel the same way? Or is this offense more efficient? I look at, the Super Bowl year seems to be an outlier. They averaged around 28 points per game. In the other years, 22, 24, we go through first quarters where you're not scoring any points, you're frustrated. I don't know if this offense is efficient but just not sexy. I just think it's your average offense. Can you win with an average offense in this league? I ask you.
No, you cannot, and not with the defense that they have, right? You have to, first of all, forget the defense, right? Even good defenses go up against good teams sometimes and give up points. You look at these next 5 opponents. Cleveland, they're not going to probably score a lot of points. If they do, then the season's gone anyway. If the Cleveland Browns, who basically have 2 guys that can hurt you, right, wind up rolling up 28 to 30 points on the Eagles and win, forget it. The season's done. You got nothing at that point, right? But you're going to need to score points to beat the Packers next, to beat the Saints, to beat the Cardinals for sure, right? And who's the other team in there? Packers, Saints, Cardinals. I'm missing another team. Oh, yeah. I forgot. The team that the Eagles never beat.
But you got defense, to come on. You can score some points, right?
Right. That's my point. Yeah. If you've got to score points, and in some cases, these defense will allow you. Arizona's defense isn't great either. If the Eagles don't do that, they're done. You got to score points to beat these teams. And as you're mentioning, they're not scoring points right now. Even in the games where they have the 2 games against Pittsburgh and Baltimore, it's both were third and fourth quarter points. They were not just constantly putting points on the board and just losing shootouts. I mean, they were behind big. Defenses tend to sag and relax and play soft when you're up big, and the Eagles were able to get back in. This will tell you everything you need to know about the Philadelphia Eagles this next 5 games. And there could be massive changes, but the big problem is, Hunter, is that their problems right now to me are so systemic. We can talk about Doug's coaching. We can talk about Carson as a quarterback. Those are clearly 2 really big problems. Jim Schwartz's defense has been giving up over 25 points in a lot of these big games, right? And then start at the top. Howie Roseman, the drafts. You go look at the draft. They're not getting anything from last year's first-round pick because he's hurt. Okay, not his fault, but nonetheless, there were questions about Andre Dillard going into the year anyway, right? You're not getting anything from your 57th overall pick, J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, who is now inactive, okay? You're not getting anything from your first-round pick this year. Well, that's not true. He's been hurt a little bit, but so the jury's out. But your second-round pick, Jalen Hurts, which everybody, convinced themselves that this was a really good idea because yada, 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 and the Eagles know what they're doing in quarterback factory. Well, he's playing like 2 or 3 snaps a game and not giving you much. And then, of course, your third-round pick is a linebacker that you desperately need who does not know the defense well enough or does not have the pedigree right yet to play this position. That's killing the Eagles, and that has nothing to do with Doug and Carson.
Very true. Very true. The way I think of it is, and I'm not someone who just screams and says you got to fire this guy, that guy every time you're upset with someone. I'm frustrated as anybody with Doug Pederson, and I'm very vocal about it. But I don't sit here and demand that he's gone, even though that might be a road they go down. I don't know. I'm just saying I don't demand for change every time adversity hits because I realize that, look, sometimes things do happen. Sean Payton almost got canned from New Orleans 7-9, 7-9, 7-9. turn it back around, and here they go. So, and look, John Harbaugh, he missed the playoffs a bunch with the Ravens. He was almost gone. Now look at him. So I'm not screaming that I demand change this instant. But I do look at the Sixers, for example, as we just talked about. Heading into this season, when I looked at what was happening, right, they got swept by the Celtics. You were really pissed off with Brett Brown. Everybody wanted him fired in this city. Fine. But anyone with the right mind can look at this and go, yes, that was a step in the right direction. But the main issue was the front office was a mess. Joshua Harris making the decisions, and you have David Blitzer, Scott O'Neil, all these people in place. It started from the top. Until you fix the top, you're screwed. You're not going anywhere. Then here comes Daryl Morey. Look at us the day after the draft. We believe and we have trust because we've seen the guy have success. Now, I'm not saying that means Howie needs to be gone. Howie's a joke. I think Howie has a hell of a skill set financially that is very beneficial to this organization. But it just proves that, yes, the coaching and all that can change. The roster can change. But until you change what happens up top, same thing going on with the Phillies. If you can get a Theo Epstein, move on from Matt Klentak, that can now start the process of fixing the issues on the field or on the court. Is that something that the Eagles need to look at from that standpoint?
I certainly think it is. There's no doubt about it. There's a lot that's gone wrong. I think the storylines and the chatter tend to center around Doug and Carson, and for obvious reasons. But to act like that's the only thing that's been wrong with the Eagles now for a couple of years. I mean, we've talked about the injuries, we've talked about the drafting, the free agent acquisitions right now don't look so good. So it's, but I do think it's fair to say this. Some of that stuff, I know. Some of that stuff would be covered up if the quarterback and the head coach were doing better. The problem is, when you listen to them, I don't know that they're on the same page. I think that's fair to say. And so they're not pointing fingers at each other, but they're also not in unison with what's going wrong. One's saying, we'll get better. It just needs this time, that time. The other one's saying, well, I wish we would stop turn the ball over. And it's really not the play calling that's the problem. See, when you're a coach and you're the play caller, and you say it's not the play calling, I thought I was in a good rhythm, then you may not be throwing anybody under the bus. But the only interpretation you can make from that kind of a statement is, well, if it's not the play calling, then you're saying something else is the problem. And then that forces the person to look to what else is the problem. And when you've got the big glaring Carson Wentz 58% completion percentage and passer rating in the 70s or it's really bad, then all of a sudden it leaves you to say, oh, well, what you're saying is it's the guy who's trying to execute your plays that's the problem. And that's where we're at with the Eagles. I mean, parsing words and trying to figure out what everybody means.
Yeah, and also him saying, I felt I was in a rhythm with the play call during a game where that's your outcome is almost like Wentz missing 15 guys high and saying, I really like my accuracy in this game. It makes no sense. I saw you in Dallas, and they won Dallas. They won that game. That was in Philadelphia, right? The game against Dallas, right? Yeah. Regardless of where it was at,
it was.
Yeah. I thought that was the worst game plan ever that I've seen out of Doug Pederson. And then he follows it up with one just as bad. And then afterwards he says that I felt like I was in rhythm. It makes no sense because you're saying it in a game where you were abysmal. So if he truly believes that, and here's the thing, I don't think he believes everything he says in the press conference, so I do hold that into how I feel about what he says. If you feel that way, though, you're in trouble because that was garbage. And if you think that's good enough, if you think you're in rhythm and that's what you're going to continue to do, well, then this organization is screwed. But once again, I don't know if he truly believes everything that he says, and his snarkiness is starting to piss me off, too. I mean, when Jeff McClain comes up and he sees his name, he starts rolling his eyes, not giving answers. It's very unprofessional. And look, I know Jeff McClain sometimes pokes the bear a bit. Some of these other guys, too. Sorry, when you're 3-5-1, that's what you deserve, and you got to be more professional, in my opinion. I can't stand the way he's operating from a media standpoint. It's kind of embarrassing, I feel.
Yeah, when he acts that way, I just can't help but think about, hey, what happened to the new norm? The new norm was supposed to be.
I don't know who asked the question. Maybe it was Lesbo, and I forget. But he was like, "Oh, did you say the run? Oh, thanks." The poor guy couldn't even get his question out because he kept thinking he was funny. I don't think it was.
Yeah, it was Mike K. It was Mike K. of Ninja, and that to me was of all the three kind of wacky responses. That one was a show. That one was like, I'm on center stage. I got the spotlight on me. Let me put a show on. And that's never been Doug. And I don't like in general, whether it's a player or a coach or a front office, someone who steps outside of who they are, it almost seems to reveal a crack in the foundation. That's when you start to know things are going south and they can't be recovered, is when people start acting like someone they're not. Andy Reid didn't do that, but some of his actions toward the end, the firing of coaches, the hiring of some odd guys, making Juan Castillo defensive coordinator, or things that Andy wouldn't normally typically do. Now, he was also feeling the pressure from up above because they were starting to come down on, when are you going to win us a Super Bowl? So it forced him to do things that he wouldn't ordinarily do. But the bottom line is the results were not positive from that. And it's definitely an ominous, kind of like sign that Doug Pederson is starting to be a little bit different than who he is. It's either that or it's a brilliant disguise, as Bruce Springsteen would say. Either that or Doug has felt, you know what? The old Mr. Nice Guy has just not gotten through to this group for whatever reason. I've tried to be Mr. Nice Guy in the past. It's worked. This year it's not. Now I'm going to stick my foot in their rear ends and see how that works. And if that's the case, I kind of don't blame Doug for trying something different. I would rather him try something different from a play calling standpoint. But if it's how he projects himself to hold guys accountable, then maybe there's something there. We'll only know in these next 5 games whether any of this stuff works. Real quick before we wrap this up, Hunter, speaking of we'll only know, that brings the Philadelphia Phillies into the equation here because they're like in a rock and a hard place, right? I mean, they've got no upper management, at least none that the fan wants. And here comes the biggest carrot dangling in the name of Theo Epstein. The only problem is, because we can never have good things in Philadelphia, is Theo's about to step down, and the reports are that he wants to take a year off. Now, can John Middleton pull like a James Dolan did with Phil Jackson and just keep throwing millions upon millions upon millions at this guy to convince him not to take a year off?
Yeah,
because I don't want to waste a year of Noah and Wheeler and Bryce, of course, and Alec Bob. I don't want to waste a year of aimlessness while this team doesn't have a general manager who I believe can get the job done.
To be fair, Daryl Morey said the same thing. Daryl Morey said he wanted time off, and what talks? Well, $10 million a year or so talks when it comes to getting this guy here. So if John Middleton is willing to do it, now here's the problem. We all heard him speak. We all heard Andy McPhail speak. Every time they speak, it makes me want to vomit. They are horrendous. They should never be able to speak again, and I would be okay with that, and that's saying a lot because I think there's value in hearing these upper guys speak.
Mm-hmm.
They should never speak again. But it is pretty damn clear that they will not spend money this year. They're using COVID as the excuse, which, look, to a degree, there is a reasonable conversation to have when it comes to finances when running a sports team during this type of time. I'm not going to pretend like, who cares? You're a billionaire. Screw you. Like, no, it's reasonable to have the discussion. But I think they are intensifying it to an insane degree that's going to hold you back way too much when you need to still be competing and being a factor in some of these people available. So with that being said, John Middleton needs to open up that checkbook and go out there. And look, we see what's happening with the Mets. And I am afraid of Cohen. I think this guy is going to spend a lot. He's going to move the Mets past the Phillies if they continue to be who they have been over the last handful of years. And there's been reports. Here's what gives me a little bit of optimism. There have been reports that they were going to stick with Ned Cohen as the interim GM because they had Theo Epstein as a target in mind down the road. So does that change their philosophy knowing he's available now? Will he be more willing to open the checkbook knowing that, hold on, now I can possibly get him and sway him to come here earlier?
Yeah, ironically, this actually reminds me of when Joe Madden became available. All of a sudden, it realized, the contract was up. He wasn't going to be extended with Tampa. They were going to go in a different direction. And Theo swooped to come get it. He even fired Rick Renteria, if you remember, after Renteria, I think, had done like a fairly decent job that year, and he had said he'll be back. But when Joe Madden becomes available, you got to get Joe Madden. And I do see that as a situation here for Middleton. You've got to convince the here's something that's worth wondering, all right? Theo wants to take a year off. He wants to decompress. And he's also actually kind of existentially pondered whether or not he has ruined or helped ruin the game of baseball. Because if you heard his recent quotes, he's basically saying, I think we need to try to put the genie back in the lamp here as far as analytics are concerned because we've destroyed the game, right? It's like, oh, wait, hold on. We wanted you for that. But now all of a sudden you're saying you want to go backwards and go back to the way baseball used to be. I think that will make some fans very happy who have not enjoyed the declension of the game into nothing but like VORP and BABIP and velocity, exit velo, and things like that. But to get Theo here, knowing that he would like to decompress a little bit, if you're going to wind up throwing $1 billion to outbid everybody anyway next year, do you throw $1 billion at him and say it's okay if you take this year off anyway, just so that we know we have you in 2022? I feel like that is such a gigantic waste of money. But if they're going to wind up outbidding everybody a year from now anyway to get him, then why don't you just make sure you have him and overspend right now and let him be like you give him a title. He doesn't have to be as hands-on, even though as fans we want that. The most important thing is we want Theo Epstein here. And so if you have to bend over backwards and give him a little time off, it's a little weird to me. And first of all, because they just had a season that was only a half a season. So it's not like Theo didn't get a little bit of a time off last year anyway, but I'm worried about him wanting to decompress, and that like makes it impossible to get him right now.
I'm with you. I definitely am. By the way, I think I said Ned Cohen as the interim GM. It's Ned Rice. Ned Cohen is
Ned
part
Rice,
of
the Sixers, yeah.
Slop with the Sixers I wanted to move on from up top. So, yeah, but I'm with you with that. I feel I would personally be willing. Now, of course, it's not my money, so it's easier said than done, but I'd be willing to go a year with Ned Rice as the interim GM and going after Theo Epstein and just having them kind of sit back and relax. If you truly believe that this is your guy, and if their mentality was to go get him next year anyway, yes, you are throwing some money away technically because it's like, hey, you can do nothing but you're signed with us. But if you feel that strongly about him, or you were going to essentially punt the season anyway to wait for him, well, then you have a high ceiling for this guy, and deservingly so. He has a lot of success in this league, so I don't see why that would be so outrageous. It sounds silly, but you targeted the guy anyway. That was your mindset. You were going to punt and leave that whole position open. So you feel a certain way about him. Right.
The only problem is you're paying him at the same time that you're paying Middleton and Ned Rice, as you said. Now, McPhail. I wonder if they can get McPhail to just resign.
Well, he clearly wants out, right? I mean, you can hear it in his voice.
Right, but he wants to get paid. That's the thing. He doesn't. If he wanted out and said, I resign, John Middleton would be like, thank you, see you later. I don't owe you. But clearly McPhail is sticking around. He has to get paid, and that's interfering with this process because Middleton clearly doesn't want to have to pay two guys to do one job, which is really annoying. But if you're John Middleton and you've got the money and you want to get your guy, eventually you have to overpay to get your guy. And think about the backlash that this organization is going to get if they don't get Theo Epstein. And you made a great point. You made a great point about Steve Cohen. If anybody saw that press conference, if you're a Phillies fan, you should be worried. Not worried that he's going to spend a lot of money because he's a billionaire, because Arte Moreno of the Angels spends a lot of money. He buys every single free agent toy every offseason, and they never make the playoffs, right? What Steve Cohen said is, I want to give resources, but I want to be the smart organization that hires smart baseball people and builds from within. Everything that we want the Phillies to do, actually build, within and then add the players in free agency, not the reverse like they've done, where they've had to get most of their guys through free agency and add every once in a while a guy coming up like Alec Baum or Nola, right? That's what Steve Cohen wants to do. He wants to do it the smart way, which should scare people, and to me is all the more reason to go out and get Theo Epstein right now. Don't wait, whatever it takes right now.
Right. Look, and another thing to factor in, Robinson Cano got busted for PED, so that opens up another $24 million for Cohen to get his hands on. Now, I did see some reports that that's only for this season, and then maybe the other seasons the contract is back on the books for the Mets. I got to dive deeper in that, but regardless, all I know is there's some money in play for him to get a little dicey. Not that he needs more money to do it, because he's willing to spend anyway, but something to add into the equation. I'm afraid of the Mets. I hate to admit it, but I think that they are in great hands now.
I agree with you. We'll see. And then they bring back Sandy Alderson, who is actually, people don't know this. When you look at the Mets now and you see their young talent, which is really good, the McNeils, the who's the first baseman? Pete Alonso, They got this Jimenez guy, infielder, who had a really nice year. Those are all guys that were brought in when Sandy Alderson was there under the Wilpon. So you got to be concerned about that franchise, that organization. We'll end it on this. Francisco Lindor. People want him. He's a great player. I know he had a bad year last year, but in general, he's a great player. But isn't going out and trading for Francisco Lindor basically a repeat of what you've been doing for the last 5, 6, 7 years? We're just going out and getting other people's proven stars, spending a lot of money on them, and not developing your own talent.
Yes, I also don't know if you even have that much. I mean, you don't have anything in the minor leagues that would intrigue anybody. So I don't know.
That's the only reason to do the deal.
It would be a Rhys Hoskins, a Bohm.
No, you don't give up that. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So I don't even know what you even have to go out and get a Lindor.
Yeah, I don't know. The only reason to do the deal is if you can literally get him for. I saw a report where it was like Marchand. It was like I can't pronounce his name.
Well.
Ortiz. Stott. Yeah, I mean, look, if that's the deal, those 4 minor leaguers. I hate to say it, but sign me up because none of the. I don't trust them, these minor leaguers, to come up and be a player that's even close to what Francisco Lindor is. But it is a repetition of the same thing of pilfering your minor league system, bringing in a guy. Then you have to pay him. You have to make sure this doesn't become a repeat. JT Realmuto, you have to sign him immediately because I think he's a free agent after the next year, and you can't risk giving up a bunch of guys then losing this guy to free agency like that might happen with JT. So you have to pay him, which is great. Then you wouldn't have to pay Didi, right? Because now you have your shortstop, and the money is basically transferable that from what you're not going to have to pay, say, Jake Arrieta, but it still leaves you in that same position where you've got no farm system. You're paying a lot of money for other players who came up somewhere else, and you still don't have a bullpen. That's it. That would be the same thing.
It's very frustrating to think about. Now, look, the Eagles have pissed me off so much. It was refreshing to have the Sixers. We start the show. We're all pumped up. We're ending on such a sad note. It was almost like it came back to reality here. Like, damn, we are still screwed with some of these other teams. Thanks for ending it on this note, Mosh.
That's life in Philadelphia, my friend, where it is not always sunny.
Hart.
What trophy is he going to win?
The Vezina. He's
going to win the Vezina?
The Vezina trophy.
What's the odds on that right now?
I have no clue.
All right, not the Lady Bing. Has a goalie ever won the Lady Bing?
I don't think so.
That would be. I want him to be the first because we hold our Philadelphia athletes to such high regard that we want our goalie to be just mean and nasty type of goaltender, but a real dignified type of goalie who everybody respects as well to the point where he can win the Lady Bing. I would love to see Carter Hart win the Lady Bing and the MVP.
The city would be on fire if our goalie wasn't a Philly guy and he ends up being a nice guy that wins a nice award. You know this city would they would want him traded in a heartbeat if that was the case.
Not if he was also the MVP though.
That's true.
This city would say how great of a thing it is to have a goalie who is an ass kicker between the nets, but also a real gentleman, dignified guy when all is said and done. I think that would be wonderful.
Unreal.
That's probably a good place to end this right now. Carter Hart winning the Lady Bing Trophy. That's Hunter Brody. I'm Geoff Mosher. This has been Brodes and Mosh. We'll catch you on the next one.